White House says Iran is getting ready to send Russia hundreds of drones to use on the battlefield in Ukraine. As the Kremlin says, Russian President Vladimir Putin will visit Iran next week. Now, if Iran does provide military support to Russia, it would raise the stakes in Ukraine and test the U.S. warning to other countries not to aid Putin's war. Foreign correspondent Tom Soufi-Burridge joins me live from Kyiv, Ukraine, for more on this. Tom, how significant of an escalation would Iran aiding Russia be, and how could the U.S. and its allies respond to that?
Well, Dan, the U.S. already has considerable sanctions on Iran. Relations between Iran and the U.S. and the U.K. are pretty dire. The EU, European allies of the US, of course, in this war and more broadly, have a bit more leverage, I think, on the Iranians. But I think it's no massive surprise that the Iranians are lining up with the Russians. Broadly speaking, their rhetoric since the war began here is very much in line with Moscow's take. I think some analysts might point to whether or not this says something about the weaponry, the stocks of weaponry that Russia has at its disposal right now, and whether this sort of says something. You look at the fact that Russia has been pounding Ukrainian cities out east on a daily basis. They've been using up a hell of a lot of their weaponry and munitions, and maybe this is a sign that Russia now needs to go to other countries to increase its arsenal in this war.
Now, the death toll from Saturday night's missile attack in Chasiv Yar has risen to at least 43 people killed. It's one of the deadliest strikes of this war. So what's the latest on the search for survivors there?
Well, that death toll has just come in, Diane. That's a kind of breaking line we've had within the last few minutes. So I think it just tells you this was an attack on Saturday. It gives you an insight into the devastation on those two residential blocks out in this very small city out in eastern Ukraine, not far from the front line. 43 bodies now recovered, 9 survivors pulled out of the rubble, including the body of a 9-year-old boy. This is a devastating attack, and the recovery operation at least continues. They might find survivors, but I think that's increasingly unlikely.
And Ukraine is now fighting back. Local officials say they hit a Russian ammo depot in the Kherson region overnight. What's the latest on the fighting?
Yeah, we've spoken a lot about the fighting out in the eastern Donbass. The UK Ministry of Defence saying that the Russians have made very small gains within the last 24, 48 hours in that area. But significantly, we're seeing more and more talk here in Kyiv about the southern front. That is where you mentioned Kherson. That was taken by the Russians in the early stages of this war. The Ukrainians seem to be using US-supplied HIMARS rocket systems increasingly. If you look at the broad picture over the last couple of weeks, we're seeing increasing evidence of Ukrainian strikes behind enemy lines, and the Ukrainians within the last 24 hours saying they took another village along the front line there in the south, and the Ukrainians really talking up the idea of a full-scale offensive in that area. It's unclear when that might come, but it would be significant.
Now, Tom, a prisoners' rights group says that Russian forces are recruiting prisoners from penal colonies in several Russian cities to come fight in Ukraine. What's the state of Russia's ground force?
Well, on a briefing with Western officials recently, Diane, I basically heard that they described the Russian forces in this war in Ukraine as a cocktail of forces. That Western official was at pains to point out that there are Chechen forces, Russian Chechen forces, that Russia is, they claim, using a mercenary group called Wagner, which has been quite active in Africa. It's very closely linked to the Kremlin. And then you have regular Russian units as well. So Western analysts and officials believe that Russia has an issue in terms of replenishing its forces in the long term. We're more than 4 months into this war. This war is not going to end in months. It might go on years. But at the same time, that is an issue that the Ukrainians face too, right? I mean, we're seeing heavy casualties on both sides. The Ukrainians need to keep basically replenishing their reservists. We're seeing extensive training. The UK now has a program to train around 10,000 Ukrainian troops. And this is really reflecting how, in the long term, this war is not going to be won purely on this battle or that battle. It is really about which of the two armies can not only sustain their weapon supplies, their munition supplies, but also the ground forces they have in that battle on multiple fronts.
Tom, is there any sign of either side here running out of gas, so to speak? And where does it stand in trying to find a negotiation, an end to this?
I think we're nowhere near any type of negotiation. Talking to a presidential official here in Kiev over the weekend, there are no talks right now between Russia and Ukraine. And the Ukrainians don't have an appetite to go into talks at the moment. They feel that any talk, and we've heard this in certain European capitals over the last few months, of them conceding territory to reach a deal is a non-starter, because they had those kind of negotiations for 8 years, ever since 2014, when Russia really created a war in the east of Ukraine via proxy forces. And look where it got them. Russia launched a full-scale invasion at the end of February. So I don't think we're any close to negotiations yielding any kind of positive results.
All right, Tom Sufi-Burridge in Kyiv, Ukraine for us. Stay safe, Tom. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.